Hello and welcome to Kalam's answer writing session. I am back again, and this week I am going to discuss certain questions which are related to history of our India. So before we move forward, I would like to basically talk about some prerequisites that are important when you write a history based answer. What are the things that you have to keep in mind when you write a general studies answer related to history? The first and foremost thing that I am going to tell you is a not to do thing. You're not supposed to write it as an optional answer. So whoever has history as their optional, they have to be extra cautious in terms of the information they put in the particular answer, because the answer might look too dense or too technical, and this might not gel well with the taste of the examiner. I want you to keep that in mind. So what are the other things that are important in order to fetch more marks in history? In history, one important thing is to talk about the different events that are there. You need to have a chronological order in your mind about the different events that have transpired in the course of freedom struggle. Like for example, we had non-cooperation movement. Uske baad we had civil disobedience movement, and then after that there were several other small movements. Later there was Quit India movement. All this whole freedom struggle started with Indian National Congress, and it was established in 1885. And then we had the Swadeshi movement, the moderate extremist split, and so on. So this kind of chronology has to be ingrained in your blood so that you can easily write them when you write an answer. In addition to this, a new trend which has come up in terms of writing a history answer is to talk about India's map. So if the question is on Vijayanagar Empire, in fact the question is indeed on Vijayanagar Empire for tomorrow, it is really good to point out Vijayanagar Empire in the southern India and the important places like Vijayanagara, Virupaksha and so on. Even if you don't do that, just draw a triangle which represents the peninsular India, in which you can point out the Vijayanagar Empire, so to speak. In addition to this, there are several other areas in which you could point out the map of the country and show the different regions or the areas of struggle. That is a good practice that has emerged in recent times, and this is known to have fetched a good amount of marks for some of the toppers. So let us have a look at today's question. I'll read out the question for you. This question has come up in 2017 for 15 marks. So what is the question? The question is the following. Highlight the importance of the new objectives that got added to the vision of Indian independence since the 20s of the last century. So the first thing you have to look at is the word 20s of the last century. And what does this mean? This means 1920s, 1930s, 1950s, somewhere around that area is going to be the 20s of the last century, right? But there was a minor glitch in the examination in relation to this particular question, if I remember right. In English, the question was 20s of the last century, but in the Hindi part of the paper, if you look at it, they have written Tisra decade, as in the 30s. Anyway, that was a minor glitch which the people have pointed out at that point of time. But anyway, this is totally related to 20s and 30s of India's freedom struggle. That much we have established. So what is this question trying to tell us? This question has said the Indian national struggle, Indian freedom movement, has initially had a certain set of objectives. But over a period of time, because of different factors both internally and externally, a new set of objectives have been incorporated into our freedom struggle. And that is what this question is asking you to talk about. So we divide the question into different parts usually, and in relation to this particular question, how can we divide the question into different parts? So one obvious side heading is to talk about the new objectives that got added, and the second side heading moving forward will be to talk about what you are supposed to talk about, the importance of the new objectives. I want you to look at the question very clearly. It is not asking you to just list down whatever objectives have come up in 1920s and 30s. Like for example, 1920s mein you had a strong socialist and Marxist push. There was also a there was a considerable rise in the revolutionary activity. Gender equality and gender parity has become the norm. So all these things got added into the vision of our Indian independence struggle at that point of time. But look at the question. The question is asking you not to list them, but it is asking you to talk about the importance of this kind of egalitarianism, importance of this kind of new objectives being added into our freedom struggle. The most important point is that if these objectives were not added at that point of time, probably even after independence, we might not have added them for a considerable period of time. So in a manner of speaking, the Indian national movement has evolved itself into a very strong egalitarian movement, which on the one hand was trying to get independence, from the British, but on the other hand, it was simultaneously trying to create a very egalitarian social order. It was trying to create a society in which different sections, different people, including people from different castes, different religions, different castes, all of these were able to coexist mutually. Such a kind of society was being envisaged starting from 1920s and 30s. So ऐसा नहीं है कि before 1920s or 1915s there were no leaders who talked about these causes. No, there were certain leaders who talked about the causes of everybody, but the national movement was mostly focused on getting independence. And even the independence we asked was not complete Swaraj or Purna Swaraj, which came up in 1929. The independence we asked was some kind of autonomy within the British framework. Anyway, moving forward, these objectives have to be highlighted. So what are the two important side headings that I have given you all, which are supposed to go into the body of your answer? The first side heading is to talk about the objectives that have been added. The second side heading is to talk about the importance of these objectives. Having addressed the body of the question, we will move forward and look at introduction and conclusion. How would you like to introduce your answer? So there are several ways of introducing our answer in a GS2 or a GS3 kind of question, because in GS2 or GS3 there are several current affairs approaches. There are several ways of starting your answer by either definitional approach, by defining what is being asked, or you talk about the fact in relation to the question asked, or you talk about a recent current event that has happened in relation to the question. But in relation to history, you could talk about the events that have happened. You could talk about the movement of Indian national struggle as such. You could talk about the freedom struggle and how strong it was, and how it influenced a lot of people and minds, not just in the country but also outside the country. So there are several other ways of starting your introduction to a history question. I would prefer a definitional approach. I would prefer an approach in which you summarize the Indian national movement as such, because this question is Indian national movement based question. इसमें क्या ही current affairs लिख दोगे, right? So introduction mein you are supposed to write that way, and in the conclusion, because it is a 15 marker, you are supposed to assess the situation and you tell how important it was for these objectives to have been added in the 1920s itself. Like I just said, moving forward, have we not included the objectives of gender parity, social justice and so on in the 20s itself, we probably would not have added them after independence anytime soon. Anyway, so this is how your structure of your answer should look like. Now we'll move forward and look at this sample answer. So let's look at the introduction. The introduction says the following: the 20s of the last century were a watershed moment for our freedom struggle. Okay, as the struggle moved from moderate phase to the extremist phase, our objectives widened from securing freedom to the creation of an egalitarian social order. So through his introduction, he is basically trying to tell us that the Indian national movement was evolving in nature. It was evolving in terms of its objectives, it was evolving in terms of its aims, in terms of what to get from the British and what to create in the society of India. So here he has given a small schematic. He basically listed out the different eras of Indian national movement, starting from the moderate phase, and then he talked about Swadeshi militant phase, and then the Gandhian era, and he's trying to show through an arrow how the objectives have widened. So this gives a basic idea to the examiner that the student knows at the different parts of the freedom struggle and the different phases of freedom struggle. That is what you're showing through this particular diagram. See, whenever you put up a diagram, that diagram should first of all make sense, and the second thing is that if you were to write whatever was shown in the diagram, if you were to write that, it takes at least 40 to 50 words or maybe more, and the whole idea of diagram is to convey more and in a lesser space and in a more presentable manner. These are the few things that you have to keep in mind when you put up a diagram. And also it is important to put it up these days because they are fetching a good number of marks. Now moving forward, the new objectives that got added: firstly, constructive work. The constructive work became the new normal after Gandhi withdrew non-cooperation in 1922 after Chowri Chowra incident. So he has listed Chowri Chowra incident. That is a good thing. It is a value addition to his answer. So he started out his answer by talking about how the 1920s were a watershed, in a manner of speaking, in terms of moving towards an extremist phase and how it was trying to create a just and perfect social order. And then he talked about the different phases of our national struggle. Let's move forward. So next he is talking about the different caste-based movements that have emerged. So in the 1920s to 1940s, the caste-based movements have become very prominent. In fact, if you look at the different areas of South India, there were strong leaders who have come up who started talking about the rights of different castes. And this became really important because India in the medieval times was dark, in a manner of speaking. I mean, in terms of economy, in terms of polity, it was strong. In terms of polity, it was strong because of the strong Mughal empire. In terms of economy, we were doing well. There was a good amount of self-sufficiency and so on. But socially, India was very backward, and we have to accept this fact. There was a strong, deep-rooted discrimination, especially towards the lower castes, and this was trying to be corrected by the South Indian leaders, some of the leaders in the South India, and he has given examples regarding the same. Periyar's self-respect movement, first point, and next we had Ambedkar's Mahad March, Bahishkrit Hit Karni Sabha, and so on. So these are the different caste-based movements that have gotten added to the objectives of freedom struggle. Next, moving forward, the British suppression of our freedoms of expression and movement led to a focus on fundamental rights and the widening of their fundamental rights as such. That part he has not written, but the focus on fundamental rights has become very prominent in the 1920s and 30s, and in fact there was Nehru report, and then the solidification of Nehru report in the Karachi session, and so on. All these things basically talked about how important it was for us to have a set of fundamental rights. It was really important to have these freedoms given to us, and they have to be constitutionally guaranteed, and this got added into the 20s and 30s of our national freedom struggle. And then what was the reason and cause of this kind of evolution of our freedom struggle, by the way? This was because not just domestically but also internationally a lot of things were happening. While on the domestic front a good number of things were happening, like for example Annie Besant finished her home rule movement, and then Gandhi has come in 1915. He has finished his non-cooperation movement, Rowlatt Satyagraha, and so on. All these things were happening domestically, but on the international front also we had a good number of things happening. Like for example the Russian Revolution. It was a phenomenal event in the history of mankind. In fact, it has changed the facet of the world for a good for a good 7 to 8 decades or so to speak. And such a huge revolution has obviously had a good amount of impact on our freedom struggle. Our leaders started talking about economic democracy. We started talking more about creation of a socialistic pattern of society. And in fact, this was added into different facets of our constitution, as we can see the directive principles, the preamble. If you look at these things, you'll see the socialistic principles embedded in these areas, right? So let's move forward. So he has finished his answer in terms of talking about the first side heading. So far he's talked about the different new objectives that have been added, and then he still has almost 1 page left and 1/4 of another page, this particular page, and he has to now talk about the importance of these new objectives. The first thing is, if you include the causes of different classes, like for example, think of it this way. Probably if there is a national movement which is being supported by the upper classes and the middle classes, and only these people get included in the national movement, what happens in the end? Even if we get independence, the downtrodden and the socially discriminated classes will not be able to enjoy the fruits of this independence because they were never a part of the struggle. So the first thing this phenomena did was to include all the different castes and classes that were there in the society. It solidified them into a single union, and in fact, by adding the objectives of Dalits, by adding the objectives of women, by adding the objectives of different other downtrodden castes into the national struggle, we have solidified all of them under the fabric of a single entity called India. So 1920s and 30s have actually played the role of a nationalizer and an integralizer. You have to keep that in mind. That is one of the importance of the new objectives. What were the other importances? Firstly, the revolutionary elements which were not satisfied with the pace of the movement took to radical nationalism, and he has given examples of HSRE, of Bhagat Singh, Ghadar Party and so on. That is a good point. Moving forward, the pro-peasant thought process of the national movement led them to participating in different movements. So because this pro-peasant attitude was developed within the Congress and within the national movement, the peasantry as such have felt that they were a part of the freedom struggle, and they started claiming their rights. They started asking for their rights. They went out into the streets, they went through satyagrahas and so on. They participated in a lot of movements, and some of the examples are Eka movement, Kisan Sabha movement, Bardoli Satyagraha and so on. Moving forward, the new objectives led to the creation of a perfect constitution post-independence. This is a very important point, and this should have been elaborated better. Like for example, the objectives that have been added in this particular period of time, this particular phase of time, was in fact an attempt to create a very just social order, right? And this has basically percolated into the 30s and the 40s, as in 1930s and 1940s, and it has become very important for us. It has become a part and parcel of our thought process that the rights of these historically discriminated people has to be respected, the rights of women has to be respected, and so on. So these things have basically found a very strong place in the constitution itself. So because these new objectives were added in the 20s and 30s, the constitution has become so expressive in terms of giving these people their rights. So moving forward, these objectives had the strong sense of socialistic leaning, like I just mentioned, because the world over was going through a phase of churning of Russian Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, October, February, whatever revolution it is. So these things have influenced our country. We wanted to create a society in which the inequalities were minimized. So we went for Jamindari abolition, the Bhudan movement after independence, the Gramdan movement. All of these, if you see in terms of the freedom struggle and post-independence, these are the things which have their root in the 20s and 30s itself. So that is a very important outcome of these new objectives which have been added into the freedom struggle at that point of time. Now moving forward, overall, these new objectives have made India what it is today, a civilized democracy. So there is still some distance to travel to fully realize these goals, but we are on the right path towards an egalitarian social order. So what he's trying to say is these objectives have made a very good constitution for our country and we are moving in the right path. But of course there are certain problems. We still have not achieved perfect equality. We still have not achieved perfect rights for the Dalits or for the downtrodden as such. But we are on the right path because the direction has been set properly and perfectly by these objectives which have been added in the freedom struggle in the 20s and the 30s itself. So that finishes our discussion. So we will have a look at tomorrow's question, a brief look. This question is related to Vijayanagara Empire. Krishnadev Raya, the king of Vijayanagara, was not only an accomplished scholar himself but also a great patron of learning and literature. As usual, I would like you to think about this question, divide this question into several subparts and evolve points under each of these subparts, and then we will discuss the question tomorrow. Thank you.